My name is Emily Zhang, I'm 42, and my mother convinced my boyfriend to marry my sister. Before I tell you about the moment their faces turned pale when they saw my $300 million company, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. It helps to know I'm not alone. The moment my world split in two, it didn't come with a bang. It was a whisper, carried on the stale, potpourri-scented air of my childhood home. I was standing in the upstairs hallway, my hand still on the banister, the floral wallpaper I'd hated since I was 10 suddenly swimming before my eyes. I'd just driven 4 hours straight from my MIT campus to surprise them for the weekend. Surprise. That's a funny, cruel word for what was about to happen. Through the crack in the living room door, a sliver of a scene unfolded like a play I never wanted to see. My mother, Margaret, sat in her favorite armchair, swirling a glass of Chardonnay as if she were a queen holding court. My sister, Victoria, perched elegantly on the sofa, a picture of composed beauty. And between them, trapped in their orbit, was my boyfriend, Nathan. The man I was planning a future with, the man whose t-shirt I was still wearing under my sweatshirt. I couldn't hear everything at first, just the low, persuasive murmur of my mother's voice, a sound that could soothe or slice, depending on her target. Tonight, it was a scalpel. Stronger, Nathan. You have to see it. She's better for you. She understands ambition, the kind of social world you're about to enter. With her looks and her charm, she'll be a true asset to you when you're closing deals. An asset. That's what Victoria was. A beautiful, valuable object to be displayed. And me? Emily, my mother sighed, a theatrical, long-suffering sound I knew all too well. It was the sound of my perpetual disappointment to her. Emily is brilliant, of course, we all know that, but it's in her own little world. A world of screens and numbers. She'll never appreciate what you're building because she doesn't understand it. She doesn't understand people. She's too lost in her computers. Frankly, Nathan, she'll hold you back. A man with your potential can't be tied to an anchor. Nathan didn't say a word. He just stared into his glass as if the answers to the universe were swirling in the amber liquid. Then, Victoria, with the timing of a predator, reached over and placed a perfectly manicured hand on his arm. It wasn't just a gesture of comfort. It was a gesture of ownership. A flag planted on conquered territory. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a rush of heat, it was an icy flood that started in my chest and spread to the tips of my fingers. It felt like the floor had dropped out from under me, leaving me suspended in a silent, screaming void. Every instinct screamed at me to storm in there, to shatter their cozy little scene, to demand an explanation. The rage was a physical thing, a hot coil in my gut. But a lifetime of being the other daughter, the quiet one, the one who was always just a little too much and not quite enough, had taught me one thing with brutal efficiency: never, ever give them the satisfaction of seeing you break. So I didn't. I pulled my hand back from the banister as if it were red hot. I took one step back, then another, silent as a ghost in my own home. I walked out the front door, the click of the latch deafeningly loud in my own ears, and got back in my beat-up Honda. As I pulled away from the curb, I looked in the rearview mirror. The warm, inviting lights of the house I grew up in looked like the glowing eyes of a monster, watching me go. In that moment, something inside me, something soft and hopeful, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. But in its place, something else, something cold and hard and clear as diamond, began to form. They thought they had broken me. They had no idea they had just created me. To understand why I didn't just crumble on that front lawn, you have to understand the architecture of my family. It was a structure built to showcase one person, my sister, Victoria. She was 3 years older, blonde, effortlessly beautiful, a former prom queen who collected friends and admirers like charms on a bracelet. I was the quiet, dark-haired girl who collected programming languages and circuit boards. Our house was a museum dedicated to Victoria's achievements. Her pageant trophies and homecoming queen sashes lined the mantelpiece, her cheerleading and sorority photos covered the fridge. My achievements were acknowledged, usually with a distracted nod before the conversation invariably turned back to Victoria's latest social triumph. I remember when I was 16, I won the state-level coding competition. It was a huge deal in my world. I came home clutching a heavy oak plaque and a check for $1,000, money I was so proud to put toward my college fund. I found my mother in the kitchen, poring over fabric swatches. "Mom, look," I said, my voice buzzing with excitement. She glanced up, her eyes barely registering the plaque. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her finger already tapping on a swatch of shimmering satin. "Can you put that somewhere? We need to clear this table. I'm trying to decide on the material for Victoria's prom dress. It has to be perfect." Later that week, when Victoria was named captain of the cheer squad, my mother threw a catered party for 50 people. The contrast wasn't just stark, it was the entire point. My father, Robert, was a kind but gentle soul, a man whose quiet decency was no match for the force of my mother's will. He was a ship perpetually caught in her gravitational pull. He saw the imbalance, I know he did. Sometimes, when I was up late in my room, hunched over a project, he'd slip in with a can of soda and just sit with me for a few minutes in comfortable silence. It was his way of saying, "I see you." But he rarely challenged my mother directly. The most painful memory was the National Science Fair in my junior year. I had spent 6 months designing and building a rudimentary neural network that could identify plant species from leaf patterns. It was my baby. It took up half of the garage. Victoria, of course, had a fit. "It's an absolute eyesore, Mom," she'd wailed one evening. "My friends are coming over tomorrow. It's embarrassing." My dad, for once, tried to stand his ground. "Margaret, this is important to Emily. It's for the nationals." My mother had fixed him with a withering look. "More important than having a presentable home for our daughter's friends? Don't be ridiculous, Robert. It's just a hobby." The next morning, I went into the garage to find that a can of red soda had been accidentally knocked over, its sticky contents seeping into the main processor and shorting out the delicate wiring. Victoria gave me a sickly sweet, insincere apology about being clumsy. I knew she'd done it on purpose. And the worst part? I knew my mother knew, too. I spent the next 72 hours, sleepless and fueled by a desperate, caffeine-laced fury, rebuilding it from scratch. I still managed to win second place. When I told my mother, she just smiled and said, "See? A little pressure is good for you. It brings out your best." That was my life. A constant, low-grade battle against being erased. So when I got a full scholarship to MIT, it wasn't just an acceptance letter, it was a get-out-of-jail-free card. For the first time, I was in a place where my brain wasn't a weird quirk, it was my greatest asset. I found my people. I found my best friend, Zoe, a firecracker of a girl who thought my ability to debug C++ was as cool as any touchdown. And in my final year, I found Nathan. We met at a tech conference in Boston. He was handsome, charismatic, and radiated a restless energy I found captivating. He was the founder of a promising startup building an app to connect local businesses with consumers. When he looked at me, he didn't see the weird, quiet sister. He saw an equal. He saw a partner. Our first date lasted 8 hours, a blur of coffee, excited conversation about scalable architecture, and shared dreams of building an empire together. I fell for him hard and fast. I remember one night, he was hours away from a huge investor pitch that could make or break his company, and a critical bug was crashing his entire demo. His team was panicking. He called me in a state of sheer terror. I had him send me the code. I sat with him on a video call for 6 straight hours, tracing the logic, untangling the mess, until I found it, a single misplaced semicolon in 10,000 lines of code. A tiny error with catastrophic consequences. I told him where it was. He fixed it. The demo went perfectly. He called me right after, his voice thick with emotion. "Emily," he said, "you're a genius. You literally saved me." I thought I had finally found it. A person who saw me, all of me, and valued what he saw. I was so in love, so blinded by hope, that I made the biggest mistake of my life. I took him home to meet my family. The visit was a disaster from the moment we walked in the door. My mother, who usually couldn't be bothered to remember my major, suddenly transformed into a tech industry savant. She fawned over Nathan, hanging on his every word about venture capital and user acquisition rates. She cooked his favorite meal, a standing rib roast she only ever made for Victoria's most serious boyfriends. And Victoria, of course, made a surprise appearance, claiming she'd just popped by. She was dressed to kill in a silk blouse that matched her eyes, and she spent the entire evening laughing at all his jokes and talking about her entry-level marketing job as if she were a CMO, constantly finding ways to relate it to his app. She was a master, and I just sat there, a spectator at my own life, watching her slowly, expertly, write me out of my own love story. After that weekend, the chill set in. Nathan became distant. The daily good morning calls became infrequent texts. The texts became sporadic, one-word answers. He started canceling dates, always citing work emergencies. "This funding round is killing me, he'd say, his voice strained. "I'm just swamped." I wanted to believe him. I clung to the memory of the man who had called me a genius. But a cold knot of dread was tightening in my stomach. I confided in Zoe, who was blunt. "He's either cheating on you or his company is failing, or both." The final straw, the one that sent me driving 4 hours in the middle of the night, came when he told me he had to fly to New York for a critical, last-minute meeting with a potential investor. That same afternoon, I saw a charge on our shared credit card, not for a hotel in Manhattan, but for a coffee shop in my hometown, 2 blocks from my parents' house. He was lying. And I knew, with a sickening certainty, where he was. I didn't call. I didn't text. I got in my car and I drove. When I pulled up to the house, his sleek black Audi was in the driveway. And that's when I stood in that hallway and listened to my own mother orchestrate the theft of my future. After I heard those words, after I saw Victoria's hand close over his arm, I didn't just walk away. I walked in. The sudden silence in the living room was deafening. 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to me, caught in the headlights. Nathan had the decency to look ashamed, his face turning a pasty white. Victoria just looked annoyed, as if I'd interrupted her favorite TV show. But my mother, my own mother, looked me straight in the eye, her expression not of guilt, but of hard, unyielding resolution. "Emily," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "You heard?" "I heard you call me a liability," I said, my own voice shaking but surprisingly steady. "I heard you hand my life over to my sister like it was a used coat you were donating to Goodwill." "Don't be so melodramatic," she snapped, her voice sharp. I was simply pointing out the practicalities of the situation. Nathan needs a partner who can support him in the real world, not just in cyberspace. She said the word cyberspace as if it were something foul she'd scraped off her shoe. I ignored her and looked at Nathan, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was pleading with my eyes, begging him to deny it, to say something, anything. "Nathan?" He wouldn't meet my gaze. He just mumbled at the floor, "Emily, she has a point. We're on different paths." Different paths. A week ago, our paths had been heading toward a shared horizon where we would build an empire. Now, a chasm had opened between us, a chasm dug by the 2 women sitting on either side of him. I knew then it was over. Not just with Nathan. It was over with them. "Fine," I said, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "You've made your choice." I turned to my mother and sister, my eyes moving from one smug face to the other. "And so have I." They expected me to break. I could see it in their eyes. They expected tears, screaming, begging. But they had underestimated me one last time. They didn't realize that all those years of being dismissed and undervalued hadn't made me weak. They had forged a core of tempered steel inside me. I turned without another word and walked out. I didn't run. I walked. Back at MIT, I didn't crumble. I worked. For the next 2 months, I channeled every ounce of my pain, my humiliation, and my white-hot rage into a cold, silent fury of productivity. I didn't just finish my coursework, I annihilated it. I took on extra projects, I aced every final, I barely slept. I graduated summa cum laude. On graduation day, my family wasn't there. I didn't invite them. I didn't even tell them. I walked across that stage, shook the dean's hand, and accepted my diploma. In my other hand, I clutched a one-way ticket to Seattle. I was leaving my past, my heartbreak, and my toxic family behind in a cloud of exhaust fumes. Seattle was a gray, misty blur that perfectly matched my mood. For the first few months, I was a ghost, just going through the motions. I found a small, dreary apartment in a neighborhood I could afford and took a junior programmer job at a mid-level tech firm. The work was mind-numbingly easy, stuff I could have done in my sleep 5 years earlier, but it paid the bills and allowed me to be anonymous. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, it was the crushing weight of the betrayal. It was a wound that festered. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, my mother's voice echoing in my ears, calling me an anchor. I started seeing a therapist, Dr. Linden, a kind, no-nonsense woman who helped me unpack 2 decades of emotional baggage. In one session, I was talking about how I felt worthless. She stopped me. "Emily," she said, looking at me over her glasses. "They don't get to write your story. They had their chance to be a character in it, and they chose to be the villains. Now, you hold the pen. So what are you going to write?" That was a turning point. Slowly, I started to write a new chapter. I poured myself into my work, not with the frantic anger of my last months at MIT, but with a quiet, focused determination. I started taking on side projects, volunteering for the tasks no one else wanted, building my skills, and making a name for myself within the company as the quiet woman in the corner who could solve impossible problems. I dealt with the casual sexism, the male colleagues who would try to talk over me in meetings or take credit for my ideas. Each time it happened, it was like a small echo of my family, and it just made me more determined. About a year in, I was assigned to a massive, floundering project, a complete overhaul of the data security system for a major hospital network. It was a legendary mess, a project that had chewed up and spat out 2 senior engineers already. My boss basically threw me at it as a last resort. The lead architect on the project was a man from the Toronto office named Michael Zhang. Our first video call was tense. He was brilliant, sharp, and clearly skeptical of the junior programmer from Seattle who'd been thrown onto his team. He didn't hide his annoyance. For weeks, we worked together, our relationship strictly professional and a little frosty. He'd send over complex problems, and I'd send back elegant solutions. I could feel his surprise through the emails, the slow thawing of his skepticism. Then came the breakthrough. The hospital system had a critical vulnerability, a backdoor in its legacy code that could expose the private medical records of thousands of patients. It was a ticking time bomb. The entire team of senior engineers had missed it. I found it at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. I didn't wait for the morning. I called Michael's cell phone directly. I explained the flaw, my voice calm and precise, walking him through the lines of code on our shared screen. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I thought he was angry that I'd woken him up. Then, I heard him let out a slow, deliberate breath. "Wait," he said, his voice different now, stripped of its arrogance and laced with something I hadn't heard before, pure, unadulterated respect. "How in the world did you see that?" That was the beginning. Michael saw my mind first, and he was captivated by it. Our late-night work calls started to drift into conversations about life, about our dreams, about everything and nothing. He was patient, kind, and fiercely intelligent. He never made me feel like I was too much or not enough. With him, I was just right. He learned about my past, not all at once, but in pieces, as I felt safe enough to share the story of the betrayal. He never judged. He just listened, his anger on my behalf a quiet, steady flame. The hospital project was a massive success, thanks in large part to the new security protocols I designed from the ground up. Off the back of that success, Michael and I saw an opportunity. The world of medical data was a wild west of security risks. We could do better. We started drawing up a business plan on napkins in a 24-hour diner. We quit our jobs, a terrifying and exhilarating leap of faith. We pooled our savings, took out a second mortgage on Michael's condo, and with a small seed investment from a venture capital firm that was impressed by our work on the hospital project, we founded Zhang Secure. I started going by Emily Zhang professionally. It was more than just taking my future husband's name. It was a conscious decision to shed the skin of Emily Collins, the girl who was never good enough for her family. Emily Zhang was a co-founder. She was a chief technology officer. She was building something real, something important. We worked tirelessly. Our life for the next 2 years was a whirlwind of 18-hour days, endless cups of coffee, and the electric thrill of building something from nothing. Michael was the visionary architect, the public face of the company. I was the one in the engine room, building the unbreachable fortress that was our code, making sure the foundation was solid granite. We were a perfect team. We got married in a small, simple ceremony on a cliff overlooking the Puget Sound, with only Zoe and a few close friends as witnesses. My family didn't get an invitation. I didn't even think to send one. For years later, Zhang Secure wasn't a small startup anymore. It was a powerhouse in the cybersecurity industry, the gold standard for medical data protection. And I wasn't the heartbroken girl who fled Boston in a beat-up Honda anymore. I was happy. I was successful. I was deeply loved. And I truly thought, that I had finally outrun my past. I was wrong. The past always has a way of catching up. The call came on a Tuesday morning, right in the middle of our quarterly board meeting. It was my father. I hadn't heard his voice in years, and it was a shock. It was weak, thin, reedy. He had pancreatic cancer. Stage 4. The words hit me like a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me. All the anger and resentment I had harbored for years suddenly felt petty and small in the face of that one, brutal word, cancer. He was my dad. He wanted to see me. My first instinct was to book a flight to Boston, to rush to his side. But Michael, ever my rock, my strategist, stopped me. He took my hand after the meeting. Or, he said gently, his eyes full of a fierce protectiveness, they could come here. Let them come to you. Let them see the life you've built. On your terms. He was right. It was time. I took a deep breath that felt like it was scraping the bottom of my lungs and made the call. I invited them to Seattle for a visit. A week later, they arrived. All of them. My mother, my father, looking frail and aged beyond his years, his skin the color of old parchment. And, to my utter shock, Victoria and Nathan. They stood on the sweeping stone porch of the home Michael and I had built, a modern masterpiece of glass and cedar that cantilevered over Lake Washington, and they just stared. I could see the naked, unvarnished shock on their faces. This wasn't the life of the struggling, heartbroken girl they had cast aside. This was something else entirely. The reason for their joint presence soon became painfully clear. My mother, in a moment of unguarded, nervous chatter, revealed that Nathan's startup had failed spectacularly 2 years prior, wiped out by a bigger competitor. He and Victoria, who had been living high on his initial funding, were now living with my parents, buried in debt. Their marriage was a wreck, they were on the verge of a nasty divorce. They hadn't come just to see my dying father, they had come on a reconnaissance mission, orchestrated by my mother, who had heard a rumor through a distant cousin that I had married well. They were here to see what they could get. The atmosphere during dinner was thick with unspoken tensions and bitter resentments. My mother tried to maintain a facade of cheerful normalcy, while Victoria kept making passive-aggressive comments that were like tiny, poisoned darts. "Wow, Emily," she said, gesturing with her wine glass around our minimalist dining room. "You certainly landed on your feet. I guess all that time with your boring computers finally paid off." Nathan was sullen and quiet, his eyes constantly darting around our home, a bitter, resentful look on his face. He looked like a man being haunted by the ghost of a colossal mistake. He was looking at the life that could have been his. The breaking point, the moment the whole charade finally imploded, came after dinner. We were out on the deck, the city lights twinkling across the dark water. My father was resting inside. Nathan, fueled by 2 glasses of expensive whiskey and years of accumulated failure, finally cornered me by the railing. "You know," he said, his voice slurring slightly, "none of this would have happened if you'd just been honest with me from the start." I stared at him, completely baffled. "Honest with you? What in the world are you talking about?" "Your mother told me everything," he sneered, his face ugly in the moonlight. "About you and that professor you were sleeping with to get a better grade. She even showed me the pictures." The world tilted on its axis. Pictures? Then it clicked, a memory so sharp it made me gasp. A memory of my mother insisting on taking a photo of me talking animatedly with my elderly, happily married thesis advisor at a university function. A photo I never saw again. Before I could even process the new, staggering depth of their deception, Victoria, who had been listening nearby, let out an exasperated sigh. "Oh, for God's sake, Nathan, grow up," she said, her voice sharp with her own misery. "Of course it wasn't real. Mom and I staged it. I took the photo from an angle that made it look suggestive. She sent it to you. We just helped you see what was already obvious. That you and I were a better fit." Nathan looked like he'd been physically slapped. He turned to Victoria, his face a mask of disbelief and raw fury. But it was his next words, spoken to me, his voice a choked whisper, that struck the deepest. "The algorithm," he whispered, his voice cracking. "The one you fixed for me that night. That was the only part of my company that ever truly worked. The only thing of value. And your mother, she convinced me to throw away the one person who actually had any talent." The air crackled with the raw, ugly truth. My mother, seeing she was losing control, rushed over, her face flushed. "I did what I had to do," she insisted, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. "I wanted the best for my daughters. I wanted a son-in-law with a solid future, not one who needed his girlfriend to fix his work for him." That's when Michael, who had been standing silently by my side, a pillar of calm in the hurricane, finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the night air like a surgeon's scalpel. "Talent," he said, looking directly at Nathan with cold, pitying eyes. "That talent you're talking about is the foundation of our company." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink into the stunned silence. Last week, Jean Secure signed a 9-figure contract with the Mayo Clinic to secure their entire patient data infrastructure for the next decade. He then turned his cool, assessing gaze on my mother. "We are not just doing well, Margaret. We are redefining the future of an entire industry. The little world Emily lives in is a world of multi-billion-dollar intellectual property. The cyberspace you mock is where the future is being built. You didn't just misjudge your daughter, you fundamentally misunderstood the modern world." Silence. A profound, echoing silence, broken only by the gentle lapping of the lake against the shore. The color drained from their faces, leaving them looking like wax figures. My mother's jaw was slack, her carefully constructed world shattered. Victoria's smug mask had crumbled, revealing the terrified, insecure woman beneath. Nathan just looked broken, utterly and completely. In that moment, they weren't just seeing my wealth. They were seeing the colossal, breathtaking scale of what they had thrown away. They were seeing the ghost of a future they could have been a part of, a future they had personally, methodically, and gleefully destroyed. And my father, who had come outside to see what all the commotion was about, looked at my mother with eyes full of a sorrow so deep it was bottomless. "What have you done, Margaret?" he whispered, his voice raspy with sickness and grief. "What have you done to our family?" The next morning was quiet and tense, thick with the ghosts of the previous night. They were leaving. Before they left, I had 2 final conversations. The first was with my father. We sat alone in the sun-drenched living room, the light catching the dust motes dancing in the air. He held my hand, his own feeling frail and papery. He cried, silent tears tracking through the wrinkles on his face. He apologized for not being stronger, for not protecting me, for letting my mother's narcissistic ambition poison everything. "I was a coward, Emily," he whispered. "And I am so sorry." I held his hand and I accepted his apology. It was years too late, but it was real. It was the closest we could get to a peaceful goodbye. The second conversation was with my mother. She found me in the kitchen as I was making coffee, her bravado from the night before gone, replaced by a desperate, grasping look. "Emily," she began, her voice attempting a wheedling tone. "Your father's medical bills are astronomical. And with the house and the inheritance all tied up, we're in trouble. You're my daughter. You have a duty. You can't let us go under." I looked at her, at this woman who was my biological mother but a stranger to my heart, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or pain. I just felt a profound, weary sadness. "I built my life on 2 things, Mom," I said, my voice calm and even. "Truth and trust. The 2 things you took from me. I have no duty to clean up a mess you made." I walked over to my desk, wrote something on a piece of paper, and handed it to her. It was the number for a top financial advisor. "I can't help you. But he can. This is the last thing I will ever give you. If you feel you have some legal claim, you can get a lawyer." It wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of finality. It was me, closing a door I should have locked and bolted years ago. In the year that followed, my father passed away. I was with him, holding his hand, and he died peacefully. Nathan and Victoria finalized their bitter divorce, 2 people adrift in the wreckage of their own making, forced to start their lives over from scratch with nothing. My mother, unable to keep up with the mortgage and the debts, was forced to sell the house I grew up in. I heard through Zoe that she was living in a small, rented condo, alone. I didn't rejoice in their misfortune. My victory wasn't about their failure, it was about my success. A success I was now determined to use to create something positive. A few months ago, I stood on a stage at MIT, a place I had once fled in shame and heartbreak. I was giving the keynote address at a conference on cybersecurity. My topic was data integrity in a world of misinformation. I talked about the critical importance of truth, of protecting facts, of building systems that people could trust. I told a sanitized version of my story, about how a single piece of deliberate misinformation almost derailed my life, and how it inspired the mission of my company. I was turning my deepest wound into my life's work. At the end of my speech, I announced the formation of a new scholarship, fully funded by my husband and me. "The Robert Collins Memorial Fund," I said, my voice thick with emotion but steady, "will be awarded each year to a young woman in technology who dares to pursue the truth, no matter how difficult it is, and no matter who tells her she can't." Sometimes, life's greatest gifts come wrapped in the most painful packages. The betrayal that almost broke me also set me free. It forced me to find a strength I never knew I had, to build a life bigger and more beautiful than I could have ever imagined, and to find a love built not on convenience or assets, but on a foundation of unshakable, mutual respect. There are people in this world who will try to write your story for you. They will try to define your worth, to tell you who you are, to put you in a box that makes them feel comfortable. My mother tried to put me in a box labeled disappointment. My sister and my ex-boyfriend tried to put me in a box labeled less than. But I'm lucky. I've always been a better programmer than they were storytellers. I just rewrote my own code. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It wasn't easy to share, but I hope it helps someone out there who might be feeling the same way. My question for you is, what's one piece of advice you'd give to someone who feels undervalued by their own family? Let me know in the comments below. And if my story resonated with you, please don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more. It means the world.